Hello, and welcome to the Center for Business Modeling's Expert Series podcast. Center for Business Modeling's mission is to help business leaders and entrepreneurs plot a simplified path to success with a full array of streamlined financial, operations, sales, and marketing planning tools. I'm your host, Nate Warren. In the interest of making the best use of your time today, and by the way, thank you for listening, we're going to offer you 15 solid minutes of insight so you can get on with your day and focus on what you do best. So today we're talking with our esteemed guest, Jim Franklin. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Nate, and thank you so much for that introduction.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you. As we understand it, drawing on your deep experience as a sales executor and manager and engineer of sales processes, you're going to talk to us about some of the shortcomings that are inherent to the traditional linear sales funnel that we all know and love, right?
That's correct, Nate. I'm going to talk a little bit about the buyer cycle and the sales funnel and how important it is to make sure that you're addressing both and that they're, quite frankly, that they're integrated. But first, I'd like to set a little groundwork, some foundation for this discussion with some of the challenges that are facing today's sales organizations. As a sales leader, these numbers should be very eye-opening, but also should represent some tremendous opportunity. If we look at the sources, there's multiple sources that this information came from, including CSO Insights, including Demand Metrics, and Forrester. But a couple of things that we really want to take a look at and why it's important to address the buyer cycle and how that integrates to the traditional sales funnel is if you look at that top graphic there, the buyer's journey, most of the decision, up to 70%, is already completed, and we'll talk about how that process is kind of enabled by the buyer throughout the cycle. And then a couple of the other ones I want to talk about are the sales reps. Only 58% made quota, and only 33% of a sales rep's time is actually spent selling. So what we want to do is how do we address those challenges? How do we start looking at what that means? So in addressing the challenges, I've found there's typically three key questions. Nate, if you would forward the slide, please. Thank you. Is your sales process capable of matching the dynamic buyer cycle? Is your sales team trained to understand, and does your organization have the ability to deliver the right content at the right time to the appropriate buyer persona? Now, this is a very important bullet point for several reasons, because I've introduced a couple of terms here that we'll talk about through the course of this. The buyer persona, and then the business issues and the dynamic buyer's cycle. So if we look at the next slide, which is, okay, what does a funnel typically look like today? Well, I'm sure all of you that have been in sales for a while are quite familiar with this type of a diagram. First we have visitors, and then those visitors get the leads, and then those leads go to opportunities, and then those opportunities, if it's executed correctly, will turn into customer. Well, some of the challenges, as you can see from these bullet points, is one size does not fit all, and what that means from what I've seen in my experience is it really can be an inhibitor for maturity and growth of your sales organization. And from a one-size-fits-all, why that's important is from a messaging and process perspective that it's difficult to align the buying cycle with the sales funnel. So as we look at, okay, what are the elements of the sales cycle, or the buying cycle? What are the elements of the buying process? And it's typically quite dynamic in nature. So as we go to the next slide, please. The buyer, as we mentioned earlier, can come in, it's approximately 70% of their research is done prior to even engaging. So that's the exploration phase of this process. So how does that happen? That happens through websites, that happens through peer references, that happens through conferences. So again, as we look at this, there's a lot of background information going on in today's market. It's also driven by social media. So there's multiple channels and multiple touches throughout this entire process. and we have to make sure that we address that throughout the process. And then if you look at the stage, it's pretty straightforward. Evaluate, what does that mean? Engage. However, what I want to kind of talk about engage here, well, as the buyer engages your salesperson, we want to make sure that that salesperson understands what the buyer's needs are, so you don't start at a product description, for example, because that buyer may already understand quite a bit about your product from downloading product data sheets, from downloading some case studies. So you want to make sure that as you engage the prospect that you understand their business requirements, and then from there, as you become the trusted advisor, and there's numerous ways you can do that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, is the customer will become, or the prospect will become a customer, and then you always like to expand those customers by either cross-selling or upselling. So again, what this slide illustrates is it's a dynamic process. The prospect can come in any one of those 5 stages to the sales funnel, so you just need to be prepared to deliver that right information. So if you look at what that is together, which is the next slide, please, Nate. So again, as I've mentioned, that those prospects, they can come into the sales funnel at any point along the time, through any point in time along the cycle. And what that gives you is what I'm going to call an integrated revenue pipeline. So what does that mean? That means you have to have the ability to deliver the right content. That means you have to be able to track what content. That means you need to be able to track what type of content the buyer has already taken a look at, and then that will help frame some additional content and additional discussions going forward. So really, as you look at the capabilities that really enable the salespeople, you have to be able to have the ability to be responsive. So if we look at the next slide, when we talk about responsive and not rigid. So here it's incredibly important to be able to do the right content to the right prospect at the right time, irrespective of where they are in the sales cycle. So an example would be if somebody comes in the engaged part of the buyer's cycle, that you might have to provide some reference information. You might have to provide an ROI study. You might have to provide a case study, whereas if they come in, engage the salespeople in the exploration stage, that's a different set of content. And really what that means is you truly need to track everything so that you can, in fact, differentiate yourself from the competition with the ability to do that. So it's almost like a guided selling, so to provide the sales reps with a relevant information at the current stage in the sales process. Again, that is very important, and hopefully you'll understand that's a theme throughout this entire presentation. So what does that mean from a key questions perspective? Well, have you identified the buyer cycle? If you recall, the buyer cycle in today's stage, again, it's 70%. Their journey is nearly 70% complete by the time they engage your sales rep. So if you've not done a good job at identifying the buyer cycle, you'll probably be in one of those of the 42% that didn't make their quotas. So you want to make sure that you've identified that. Now, how do you map the buyer cycle to the sales process? The graphic we talked about a little bit earlier, I think that gives you a good starting component. And from my experience, if you take a look at both of those, you can obviously edit those and change those to make it work for your organization, but it's incredibly important that you've identified both. And then there's the technology stack. So what does this technology stack include? Well, it typically includes a CRM, Salesforce, something along those lines. It typically will include a marketing automation. It typically will include some sort of a sales enablement component. And in the sales enablement component, you should have the capability to deliver that content at the right time and also track all the analytics associated with the delivery of that content, and also the opportunity management, so the acceleration of the opportunities. And then does your reporting and analytics talk about the key performance indicators? And what this, by combining the buying cycle, identifying the buying cycle with the sales process, you'll be able to measure the percent of reps achieving quota, and we've seen some significant increase in percentages. But if you look at that, even if those reps, if you have 15% more reps attain quota, that's going to drop significant revenue to the bottom line. And also from a forecast accuracy, from a sales leadership position, that's also extremely important. And then that also helps bridge the gap between sales and marketing in the aspect that you can track the content that's utilized for deals that have been won, and what is the content associated with that. So Nate, that kind of is a brief overview, a brief summary of how the buying cycle and the sales funnel work together, and the importance of identifying both of those and having the technology stack and the key performance indicators with those.
No, that was really great. Thank you. I have a couple of questions if you've got a minute or two.
Yes, I do. Please.
So you work with a lot of organizations, and among those, how often do you see the problem being a matter of process versus just having the right tools?
Quite frankly, nearly 100% of the time. And here's some of my thoughts around that. People, almost everybody has some sort of a tool set, right? Whether that's Salesforce or from a CRM or a Marketo or Eloqua, from a marketing automation, or a RO innovation from a sales enablement. But it's important to get the adoption up, and one of the ways you get the adoption up is by implementing the process, deploying the process, and having the correct technology. And once the reps, if it's deployed correctly, utilizing the proper processes, if it's deployed correctly, the reps will, in fact, as will the marketing and sales leaders, see positive results every time.
Interesting. You also mentioned, and then this kind of piqued my curiosity a little farther back in your presentation, and you talked about getting the right content to the right prospect at the right time. Can you sort of give us an example of what that looks like in the context of the dynamic sales funnel, or the buyer-centric one?
Yes, I certainly can. So let's say, for example, a buyer comes in at the engage cycle, but this is a totally new lead or a new buyer. Typically in the past, the tendency has been, okay, this is the first contact we've had with them. There may be some, from the marketing automation, there may be some information that, there may be some information that says, okay, this person is pinged a website, but instead of just doing a product intro or a company intro, that because this buyer persona, the buyer persona may be an IT person, for example. So what your system can recommend is, okay, this buyer persona has come in at the engage stage. They're an IT persona, so they're looking for maybe some more technical information. So I can provide them with a case study that talks about how the selling organization's technology has successfully been deployed, some ROI studies. So that's just one example, Nate. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And you also reminded me of something else you brought up about, in your first slide, about sometimes folks hit your funnel having already done a great deal of their research, and they don't need well, hello, hi, how are you? Here's the overview and boilerplate style stuff. You need to hit with more precise, targeted information. Actually,
that tends, if that happens, which it does, as much as we hate to admit it, that tends to make that interaction with the buyer unpleasant for the prospect, and it may even take them back out of the interaction with your sales team and back looking, to evaluate to some other organization. So again, I think that one of the key KPIs that I'm not certain that I mentioned, but it all ties together, is it's all about reducing time to revenue, and so how do you do that? It really is the combination of the processes and the technology that we've talked about today, with a kind of integrating the buying cycle and the selling funnel.
Well, Jim, that is awesome stuff, and we thank you very much for making the time for both us and our listeners today.
Nate, it's been my pleasure, and please encourage the listeners if they've got any questions. I believe we've got a way to contact myself and Center for Business Modeling. Correct? Yes, there we are.
Absolutely, yeah. There's Jim right now. If you like what Jim's talking about and want to learn more about it, you can reach out to him on LinkedIn or reach out to him directly at jim@impactb2bsales.com. Next we've got the end. That's it for this installment of the Center for Business Modeling's Expert Series podcast. As always, we're here to help you take the brain damage out of business planning. So feel free to head on over to centerforbusinessmodeling.com and avail yourself of the many free resources we have on the site right now. Until next time, I'm your host, Nate Warren, thanking you for listening once again. We look forward to seeing you again with more great guests and their business planning insight. Good day, success for all, and until next time, keep planning to win.